I never imagined that something as small as a sock could unravel everything I thought I knew about my life. Yet there I was, standing in Evan's apartment, holding a black athletic sock that wasn't mine, my hands trembling, heart racing like it wanted to escape my chest. I had been dating Evan, 26, for 8 months. Things had seemed normal, even perfect. But now every memory, every smile, every late night text was suddenly clouded with doubt. It wasn't just the sock. It was the way Evan smirked when I asked about it, brushing it off with a casual, "Don't make this weird, it's just a sock." That smirk haunted me. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe it fell from laundry. Maybe a friend had visited, but none of it made sense. His roommate, Danny, later admitted it came from a recent encounter Evan had brought home. The story didn't match what Evan had told me, not even close. And suddenly, his frequent overtime shifts that I had accepted without question started to feel like lies, carefully crafted to cover something else entirely. I had always trusted him, or at least I thought I had, but now my gut screamed otherwise. I remembered the little inconsistencies, the vague excuses, the way his voice changed when I pressed for answers. My chest tightened with a mix of anger, confusion, and disbelief. How could someone I loved weave such an elaborate web of deception right under my nose? That night, I sat alone, replaying every conversation, every smile, every reassurance he had given me. And then it hit me. The sock was just the tip of the iceberg. My mind raced, imagining what else could be hidden in closets, behind doors, tucked away where I wouldn't notice. Could Evan really be the man I thought I knew, or had I been living with a stranger this whole time? I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. Even the simplest thought made my stomach twist. And deep down, I knew the truth was out there, buried under layers of lies. I just didn't know if I was ready to confront it. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. I'm Rachel, 24, and for most of my life, I've prided myself on being grounded, level-headed, and fiercely loyal. I work part-time at a community college while finishing my degree in communications, juggling classes, tutoring sessions, and freelance writing gigs. I have always been independent, not in a rebellious way, but in a way that I knew I could stand on my own feet. Friends often joke that I overthink everything, but I think it's just that I notice details others ignore. Evan and I met at a mutual friend's birthday party nearly a year ago. He was charming, effortlessly confident, with that easy smile that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. I remember our first conversation vividly, how he noticed I was sipping my drink quietly in the corner, asked if I liked the music, and somehow managed to make me laugh within minutes. There was a spark, undeniable and immediate. Over the next few weeks, we texted constantly, went on long walks through the city at night, shared secrets, and slowly built the intimacy that made me feel like I had finally found someone who understood me. At first, everything was perfect. Evan was attentive, thoughtful, and funny in ways that made my heart race. We shared weekends with his friends and mine, cooking together, binge-watching shows, and planning little adventures that felt like our own private world. I loved his teasing sense of humor, the way he would ruffle my hair when I was stressed, the way he remembered small details about me that no one else ever had. But there were subtle signs I ignored. The occasional late-night texts he would brush off as just work, the disappearing acts that he would explain with vague excuses, the way he sometimes became defensive when I asked simple questions. I pushed them aside, telling myself I was overthinking. I trusted him. I wanted to trust him. My relationship with Evan's family was complicated. His mother was warm but protective in a way that sometimes felt suffocating, always hinting that I needed to be perfect to be part of their lives. His father was quieter, skeptical of anyone new in Evan's orbit, often observing me with a neutral, almost calculating gaze. I tried to navigate the expectations without rocking the boat, because I genuinely cared for Evan and wanted to be accepted. And then there was Danny, his roommate and longtime friend. Danny was easygoing, funny, and immediately likable. She had lived with Evan for years, and I had always felt slightly on edge around her, worried that I would somehow appear intrusive or unwelcome. Over time, we became friendly enough, sharing casual laughs and small conversations, but I always sensed there was an unspoken layer to their friendship I didn't fully understand. For 8 months, I had built my world around Evan. I trusted him, confided in him, and allowed myself to imagine a future together. I ignored the small inconsistencies, the hints of secrecy, telling myself that love required patience and understanding. But as I stared at that black sock wedged behind his nightstand and later pieced together the conflicting stories from Danny, I realized that trust had been a fragile illusion, and my reality was about to unravel in ways I couldn't have predicted. It started with small things, little inconsistencies in Evan's words, the faint tension behind his smiles, the unexplained late nights at work. At first, I brushed them off. Everyone has a busy schedule, right? But slowly, those tiny anomalies began to pile up, forming a pattern that my gut refused to ignore. Danny, his roommate, became an unintentional participant in my growing unease. I noticed the way she would avoid looking me in the eye when I asked simple questions about Evan's whereabouts. Sometimes she laughed too quickly, or her voice carried a note of hesitation that didn't fit casual conversation. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she was tired, maybe she was just private, but there was a tension I couldn't name. Then there were Evan's late work shifts. He claimed the medical office where he volunteered sometimes required him to stay late for paperwork or filing. Logical explanations, but my instincts started to whisper doubts. I began cross-checking his schedule with minor observations. The lights in his office were off. At times he said he was working. He never seemed exhausted from real overtime, and coworkers casually mentioned seeing him leave early. Each detail on its own was small, but together they gnawed at me like a quiet, persistent storm. One evening, while visiting his apartment, I noticed the first subtle sign of deceit. His phone, briefly unlocked when he left the room. I didn't touch it, but the glimpse of messages from someone named Riley, a name I didn't recognize, made my heart skip a beat. I pushed the thought aside, telling myself it was harmless, that maybe she was a coworker, a distant friend. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. Even the little moments between us began to feel layered with tension. Evan would avoid eye contact when I asked about his day, laugh nervously when I teased him, and sometimes brush off my questions with that infuriatingly calm, "You're overthinking it." I hated that phrase, hated how it made me doubt my own instincts. But I loved him, so I stayed. I watched, observed, and cataloged every inconsistency, even as I tried to maintain the facade of trust. Then came the sock. That black athletic sock, wedged in a corner behind his nightstand, changed everything. Holding it in my hand, I realized that my suspicions weren't paranoia. They had a tangible, physical anchor. And when Danny admitted it belonged to someone who had recently been in the apartment, a chill ran down my spine. Evan had lied. The timing, the story, the defensiveness, it all pointed to a hidden truth I wasn't yet ready to confront. I replayed every moment, every casual excuse, every "I'm just tired" text. The unease grew into anxiety, anxiety into obsession. I started noticing small details I had once ignored, the scent of cologne that wasn't his, the slight disarray in his apartment after a day he said he'd been working late, the way his demeanor shifted when I approached sensitive topics. It was in those moments that the first seeds of conflict took root. I didn't yet know the full story, but I could feel the edges of it, sharp, cold, undeniable. The trust I had invested in Evan was fraying, and the more I tried to rationalize it, the tighter the knot of doubt became in my chest. I loved him. I wanted him. But now, a quiet, insistent voice inside me whispered that love wasn't enough, not when truths were being hidden behind lies so carefully constructed. The day I discovered the truth started like any other, but the air felt heavier, charged with a tension I hadn't noticed before. I had gone over to Evan's apartment under the pretense of dropping off some papers for his weekend project. Danny was out, leaving the apartment strangely quiet. I told myself it was just coincidence. I was just helping. I lingered in his room, trying not to seem intrusive, when my eyes caught it. A phone charger that didn't belong to him, tucked behind a stack of books. Then a deodorant stick, Old Spice, a brand I never used, a scent that made my stomach churn. And finally, a hoodie, too large to be his, from a brand I didn't own. My hands shook uncontrollably as I pulled the items out one by one, each discovery a confirmation of my worst fears. I sank onto the edge of his bed, heart hammering, palms clammy. My mind raced. Why would someone else be here? How long has this been happening? Could I have missed the signs all this time? I felt the first flickers of anger, of betrayal, mingling with a deep, gnawing sorrow. The world I had built around Evan was crumbling, piece by piece. When Evan came home that evening, I tried to mask my turmoil. We sat on the couch, exchanged casual words, ordered takeout, and watched a show I didn't even remember. On the surface, everything was normal. But inside, I was screaming, heartbroken and furious at once. Every word he said, every laugh that didn't reach his eyes, felt like a blade twisting in me. Later, I confronted him, not with anger, but with a quiet, deliberate calm. "Evan," I began, my voice steady despite the tremor beneath it, "I need to ask you something. Who is Riley?" He froze, the color draining from his face. "What? What do you mean?" he stammered. I held up one of the items I had found, the hoodie. "I found these today," I said, letting each word land carefully. "A charger, deodorant, a hoodie that isn't yours. How long has someone else been coming here?" The silence that followed was deafening. His eyes darted away, and for a moment I almost didn't recognize him. The man I thought I knew, the one I trusted, seemed to shrink before me, cornered and exposed. "It's not what it looks like," he finally muttered, voice barely above a whisper. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Not what it looks like?" I echoed. "Evan, I've pieced it together. The late shifts, the conflicting stories from Danny, the sock I found weeks ago. All of it. You've been lying to me. For months." His face paled, and his hands fidgeted nervously. "Rachel, it wasn't supposed to happen like this." "Not supposed to happen," I repeated, my voice rising, my pulse racing. I could feel my chest tightening, my stomach twisting into knots. "You've been seeing her behind my back. You've been using me, stringing me along while you decided who you really wanted. Do you even realize what that does to someone?" He opened his mouth, then closed it, words failing him. I could see the guilt, the panic, the shame, but it did nothing to soften the blow. I had loved him, trusted him, invested so much of myself into us, and now I was staring at the truth, an undeniable betrayal that left my world shattered. My hands trembled as I held the evidence, the items that confirmed everything my gut had suspected. I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes, a mixture of grief and rage, a cocktail of emotions I had no words for. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was physical, invasive, a violation of every private space I had shared with him. And in that moment, I realized something essential. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't rationalize it away. The trust was broken, the illusion shattered, and the relationship I thought was real had been built on lies. My body shook, my heart ached, but clarity emerged from the chaos. I knew I had to act, to confront the truth fully, not just in my mind, but in reality. The inciting incident was no longer a discovery of a sock, a charger, or a hoodie. It was the collapse of everything I thought I knew about Evan, about us, about love itself. And in that collapse, I felt the first stirrings of something fierce, an unwillingness to be deceived, an instinct to reclaim my power, even if it meant walking through fire to do it. The next morning, I woke up with the feeling that everything around me was tilting. My heart was still racing, as if it wanted to leap out of my chest, and my mind was spinning with images from the night before. The items I had found, hoodie, phone charger, deodorant, were still vividly clear in my head, each one a reminder that Evan had betrayed my trust. I sat on the bed, hugging a pillow, silently asking myself, what did I overlook? How did I miss the small signs? I remembered the first time I found a man's sock in his room, then the vague answers, the clumsy explanations from Danny. Back then, I had tried to forgive, to let it go, but now everything had piled up, impossible to deny. I searched through my memories of the past 8 months, every promise, every intimate moment, every smile, every look Evan had given me. Now all of them were stained with suspicion. Every time he said, "You're the most important person to me," or "I always want us to be together," suddenly felt hollow and fake. It was as if I had been living in a play he himself had directed, and I was the only audience member being deceived. I knew I had to confront him, but not to scream or argue meaninglessly. I wanted him to understand the seriousness of it, to realize the pain he had caused. When he walked into the living room, I stood there, back straight, my gaze sharp as a blade. My heart was still pounding, but my voice stayed calm. "Evan, we need to talk," I began, each word clear and steady. He looked at me, his eyes avoiding mine, lips pressed tightly together. I continued. Last night, I saw everything. These aren't old items, Evan. They're new, recent, and they're not mine. Can you explain that? He swallowed, his voice trembling. Rachel, I. It's not. It's not what you think. What I think, I repeated, anger rising above the pain, though I still kept myself under control. You cheated on me. You brought someone else into our lives and lied to me for months. Everything you ever said to me. Do you think I wouldn't notice? I could see him hesitate, every muscle in his face twitching as if he were wrestling with the truth. I took a deep breath, trying not to break down, but my heart still tightened, each beat a sharp stab of pain. Rachel, I didn't want to hurt you. I I was wrong, he said at last. But those words were nowhere near enough to ease the pain. I looked straight into his eyes, wanting him not just to hear me, but to truly understand, to feel the loss and betrayal I was carrying. I let out a long breath, my whole body feeling unbearably heavy, my hands shaking. Do you know how hard it is to trust someone? And when that trust is destroyed, all that's left is pain and doubt. I don't even know who I can trust anymore. I felt every surge of anxiety, every rapid heartbeat, every shallow breath scraping my chest. The emptiness, anger, and loss blended together, but deep down, a part of me was beginning to turn cold, like a layer of ice forming to protect me, preparing for what came next. He stayed silent, not daring to argue, not daring to explain any more. I saw fear in his eyes, but I had no room left for pity. I realized that even though I still loved him, I couldn't forgive him right away. I needed time. I needed strength to stand firm in front of the truth. One thing was clear to me. From this moment on, I would no longer be passive. I would seek answers, uncover the truth, and make decisions for myself. This wasn't just an argument, it was a defining moment for me, for how I would face betrayal and how I would reclaim my own worth. The days that followed felt heavier than anything I had ever experienced. Every time I saw Evan, my heart would hammer violently in my chest, my hands trembling slightly, my mind spinning with questions that had no answers. But this time, I decided I wouldn't face it alone. I started paying attention to every detail, every word, every glance, every message, and even the smallest behaviors. Then, things became more complicated. Evan's family, the people I had once considered like a second family, whom I had worked so hard to get along with, started getting involved. For the first time, his mother called me, her voice sweet but carrying an undertone I couldn't ignore. Rachel, I know things are tense right now, but are you sure you understand the whole situation? Evan has always been trustworthy. Don't make a fuss over this. I felt my blood boil. I had trusted Evan, had done everything to build a good relationship with his family, and now they were doubting me, questioning my judgment and my sanity. I stayed silent because I knew any explanation I gave at that moment would only make things worse. It didn't stop there. Evan's friends, people I once thought were friendly, started taking sides subtly. They asked questions that seemed casual but were loaded. Are you sure you're not misunderstanding something? Evan isn't that kind of guy. It felt like I was being surrounded, everything conspiring against me, while Evan stood there calmly, as if none of it concerned him. Then, following tiny clues, I discovered more evidence. One afternoon, I accidentally saw a message on Evan's phone from Danny, an old friend who had recently reappeared in his life. Their conversation was full of subtle implications, secret meetings, hidden plans, ways to avoid me noticing. My stomach dropped. The items in his room that I had noticed before were just the tip of the iceberg. Now, everything was laid bare in full daylight. I realized I couldn't stay passive any longer. I decided to confront Evan directly, but this time I prepared myself mentally to remain in control of my emotions. I wanted him to face the truth, to see the consequences of his actions. When I finally sat down with him, my gaze was sharp, my voice steady, but calm. Evan, I know everything. All the messages, all the lies, and all the people you thought I didn't know about. He froze. I could see panic flash in his eyes. Instead of apologizing, he started to make excuses, shifting blame, and even trying to make it seem like I was overreacting. I shook my head, determination flooding me. No, I'm not misunderstanding. I have proof, Evan, and now every lie will be laid bare. Our argument escalated, long, intense, and heavy. I presented each piece of evidence one by one, the items I had found in his room, the messages with Danny, the lies about his work hours. Every explanation he gave was dissected, questioned, and confronted. He could no longer hide behind half-truths or evasions. And slowly I noticed something. Every lie he told not only destroyed the trust between us, but also started to shake the foundations of his relationships. His family began realizing the dishonesty, and friends looked uncomfortable when faced with the truth. Inside me, I felt a shift. I was no longer the trembling girl afraid of losing everything. I was growing stronger, more focused, more determined. I understood that in order to escape this nightmare, I had to hold on to my clarity and demonstrate that Evan's betrayal would not drag me down. But even as things seemed to gain clarity, a chill ran down my spine. I knew this escalation was just the beginning. The emotional storm had not yet reached its peak, and I had to prepare myself for what was coming next, the moment when I would hit rock bottom. The following week felt like walking through fog, dense, suffocating, and relentless. Every corner of my apartment, every sound, every notification on my phone seemed to echo with Evan's betrayals. I couldn't escape the feeling that my world had quietly collapsed while I had been busy trusting him. I found myself alone more often than not, though surrounded by reminders of our life together. His toothbrush, the coffee mug he always left by the sink, the photos we had taken during happier times, all of it stared at me like accusing witnesses. I couldn't touch them. I couldn't throw them away. I didn't know if I was holding on to hope, anger, or just numbness. The loneliness was unbearable. Friends tried to reach out, but I felt like they couldn't truly understand. How could they? On the surface, Evan was charming, confident, and everything everyone admired. To the world, he was untouchable. And yet, I knew the truth. The truth of lies, manipulation, and betrayal. My mind replayed every conversation, every detail I had uncovered. I wondered how I could have missed the signs, how I had been so blind to the red flags that now screamed at me. I felt a sharp pang of self-doubt. Was I too trusting? Too naive? Could I have done something differently to prevent this? But no matter how I twisted the memories, the answer was the same. Evan had made his choices, and I had been powerless to stop him. I tried to sleep, but my nights were sleepless marathons of doubt and hurt. The sound of the wind outside my window felt like whispers, mocking me, reminding me of the betrayal. I felt a weight on my chest, as though the world itself had turned against me. Every small noise, a creaking floorboard, the hum of the refrigerator, made my heart race. I was hyper-aware, alert, and yet exhausted beyond measure. I found myself walking aimlessly through our old haunts, the cafe where we had shared first dates, the bookstore where we had laughed over silly puns, the park where we had spent quiet evenings. Everywhere I went, memories pressed in on me, cruel and relentless. My mind screamed for closure, for answers, for something to make sense. But there was none. Only fragments, contradictions, and the realization that I had been replaced in his heart long before I discovered the truth. It was in that darkness that I felt a strange clarity emerge. Pain, heartbreak, and despair mingled with an unmistakable truth. I was stronger than the lies, stronger than the betrayal, stronger than the isolation I felt. But that realization was bittersweet. For now, I had nothing left. No comfort, no illusions, no safety. I was stripped bare emotionally, left to face the stark reality that the person I had trusted most was gone from my life, if he had ever truly been there at all. For days, I stayed in this low, almost catatonic state, barely eating, barely talking, barely moving. I felt the depth of my own vulnerability like never before. Tears became routine, each one a silent testament to the love I had invested, the hope I had carried, and the cruel awakening that I had been nothing more than a placeholder in Evan's heart. And yet, even at the lowest point, a tiny ember of resolve flickered deep inside me. I knew I couldn't remain here forever. I couldn't let the betrayal define me completely. That ember, the faintest whisper of my own strength, was the seed that would eventually grow, guiding me toward the next stage, taking back my power, facing the truth, and reclaiming my life. It happened quietly, almost by accident. I had been going through the apartment again, not to spy, not to obsess, but simply because I couldn't sit still while my mind ran in circles. That's when I saw it. Evan's laptop, left open on the coffee table from the night before. I hadn't even noticed it in my haze. Something compelled me to sit down. I hesitated, my fingers hovering above the keyboard. I didn't know if I wanted to confirm my suspicions or give myself permission to finally let it go, but the pull was irresistible. I typed in the password, and there it was. Emails, messages, schedules, all of it neatly archived. Every lie, every excuse, every carefully crafted story that Evan had told me to cover his tracks. My hands trembled as I scrolled through. At first it was anger, then disbelief, then a rush of clarity so intense it almost made my head spin. He hadn't just been cheating in the physical sense, he had been manipulating everything around me. My trust, my family's perception of him, even the way I saw myself. The patterns were undeniable. Dates, alibis, excuses. They all collapsed under the weight of truth. And then a note from a colleague fell into view, one that Evan had carelessly left unsent in a draft folder. It wasn't meant for me, but it read like a confession. He had written about someone else, how he was hiding meetings, creating cover stories, and keeping me in the dark. Reading those words felt like finally stepping out of a dark tunnel into harsh, unflinching light. I had proof, real, undeniable proof that validated everything I had felt and suspected. I sat back, letting the laptop rest on my lap, breathing hard. The panic and despair that had gripped me for days began to shift. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about power, my ability to take action based on truth rather than fear. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of control. I wasn't a passive participant in my own heartbreak. I could act. I could make decisions that didn't leave me at the mercy of Evan's lies. I thought about calling him, confronting him directly, demanding explanations. But the thought didn't thrill me. It didn't give me satisfaction. What mattered now was my clarity, my awareness, and my ability to protect myself. The next steps would be deliberate, not reactive. The flame of resolve that had flickered in my darkest moments was now growing stronger, fueled by the undeniable truth I held in my hands. I spent the rest of the day making a plan, careful, measured, ensuring I wouldn't be manipulated again. I would confront him, yes, but on my terms. And more importantly, I would protect my dignity, my heart, and my future. No more shadows, no more lies, no more confusion. I had the power to step out of the chaos he had created and reclaim my life. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I allowed myself a small, private smile. The storm had not passed, but I was no longer drowning in it. I had a compass, a map, and the knowledge that I would no longer be a pawn in Evan's games. The turning point had arrived, and with it, the first real steps toward freedom and self-respect. The morning after I discovered the full scope of Evan's deception, I felt a strange mixture of calm and determination. I wasn't angry in the explosive, chaotic way I might have been before. I was collected, almost clinical. I had proof, and proof meant power. I called him first thing, choosing my words carefully. "Evan, we need to talk, face to face," I said, my voice steady. There was a pause on the other end. "Rachel, what's this about?" he asked, his tone casual but wary. I didn't answer right away. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 1,000 times. I wasn't here to beg, to plead, or to cry. I was here to present the truth. When I arrived at his apartment, I didn't knock. I had a key. I knew this confrontation would be private. He opened the door, and the shift in his expression was instantaneous. Confidence replaced with a flicker of fear. He tried to mask it, but I could see it. I held up my phone, already opened, to the screenshots, the emails, the drafts. "I know everything," I said plainly. No theatrics, no accusations, just facts. The lies, the cover-ups, the other woman, everything. Evan's face went pale, his hands fidgeted, a rare crack in his usual composure. "Rachel, he started, but I cut him off. "Don't," I said. "I don't want excuses. I don't want apologies. I want truth, and I already have it. I know who you've been seeing, who you've been texting, and how long you've been manipulating me. You've lost your chance to explain." He opened his mouth again, but no words seemed to form. I could see the weight of reality pressing down on him. The veneer of control he had always carried was cracking. For months he had spun a perfect little world where he was charming, kind, and untouchable. Now that world was unraveling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I left without another word. There was no yelling, no drama, no public scene. The fall of his constructed life would happen quietly but undeniably. I knew his colleagues would start noticing discrepancies, friends would hear whispers, and eventually the truth would settle into every corner of his social sphere. And I walked away untouched, not by the events themselves, but by my refusal to let them define me. Back at my apartment, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in weeks. The apartment didn't feel empty, it felt like mine again. Free. I wasn't running from anything, I was stepping into my own life. I deleted Evan's number, blocked his social media accounts, and made a conscious decision not to revisit the past. The fallout was already unfolding around him. Evan's lies had reached a tipping point. His manipulation was exposed, first to me, then inevitably to those around him. He was left to face the consequences alone, the loss of trust, the loss of credibility, and the unraveling of the life he thought he controlled. And as I watched it all from a distance, I realized something crucial. I had survived. I had endured betrayal, deceit, and manipulation, yet I had emerged with my dignity intact. I hadn't retaliated with vengeance, but by simply standing in the truth, I had created the most powerful consequence of all. I didn't need to humiliate him. I didn't need to yell, scream, or beg. The truth had spoken, and it had spoken louder than any confrontation ever could, and in that clarity, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not the peace of ignorance, but the peace of knowing I had risen above the chaos, intact and unbroken. The days that followed were quiet, almost deceptively so. I didn't hear from Evan again, and I didn't seek him out. I spent time untangling myself from the emotional knots he had left behind, relearning who I was when I wasn't measured against someone else's deceit. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe without guilt, without second-guessing every word, every gesture. I surrounded myself with people who mattered, family, old friends, and even colleagues who reminded me that the world outside my heartbreak was still warm and alive. I revisited the little joys I had neglected, cooking meals just for me, walking through the city streets without looking over my shoulder, even losing myself in a book late at night. These weren't dramatic gestures of freedom, they were quiet, deliberate acts of reclaiming my life. In the mirror, I saw a version of myself I hadn't noticed for a long time, strong, alert, and unafraid of solitude. I realized that Evan's betrayal, painful as it had forced me to confront a truth I might otherwise have avoided. I deserved honesty, respect, and loyalty, not excuses or manipulations. I didn't need someone else to define my worth. I had always carried it within me. And the lesson settled slowly, like sunlight through a window. Life would hand us moments of deceit and heartbreak, sometimes from people we trusted most. But what mattered was not the betrayal itself, but how we responded. I could have been consumed by anger, by vengeance, but I chose clarity instead. I chose my own peace. Weeks later, I walked past a cafe where I had once shared countless laughs with Evan. A fleeting thought crossed my mind. The hurt still lingered, yes, but it no longer controlled me. I had risen above the chaos, not by revenge, not by confrontation, but by reclaiming my own narrative. To anyone watching this story unfold, the message is simple. Trust yourself, honor your feelings, and don't compromise your self-worth for someone else's deceit. Pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. You can survive heartbreak and emerge stronger, wiser, and more deeply aware of the value you carry. As for me, I closed that chapter of my life with grace. I didn't need to shout, to retaliate, or to chase justice. The truth and my own resilience were enough. I walked forward knowing that the next chapter would be written on my terms, honest, unbroken, and full of possibility. Because sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's proving to yourself that you are strong enough to stand, even when the world tries to make you doubt it.